Thank you.
I'm
Yes,
gonna
we
go
are
ahead.
recording.
Yeah.
So looking at these words you shared for how does it feel when someone shows up for you, I really want to highlight that there is this beautiful way that they work together with this concept of feeling grateful, relieved, held, reassured, and that also that is grounded in a space of being honored and empowered. This sort of notion of standing up for, showing up for, right? I really want to note that stand is not the perfect or complete metaphor for what it means to be there with someone, um, but that it comes from and leads to a place of being in power with someone. And I think that is super, super, super important. So I want to hold those intentions. We're going to talk about some heavy stuff tonight that's going on in the world. And I'm going to really try to keep us in a place of clarity on how we can show up and what it can look like to work in this way. But I would love for us to convene this space together with also a Shehechianu moment, sort of with the knowledge that I think this is a first for me, certainly. I think this is a first for FJMC, holding this particular type of learning and program together. And I think we need all the blessings that we can get. So I'm gonna share the Shehechianu and invite folks if you want to follow and if you want to celebrate with an amen, we can do that. Baruch atah Adonai
Adonai Elohim
Eloheinu melech haolam
Haolam
she'eheyanu
Asher
v'kiyamanu
V'kiyamanu
v'higianu
V'Higiyanu
lazman
Lazman
hazeh.
HaZeh. Man. Amen.
Amen. Amazing. Um, so before or as we jump in, I really want to bring us back. Oh, that's a perfect way to do Amen. I love it. I want to bring us to what some of the language and the work of FJMC at this particular moment in history is. And Noam, I would love to ask you, Rabbi Noam, to put in the chat, there was a statement that came out on, and actually I have it too.
I got it. I
Where's
can
the
do it.
window?
I can do it. Don't
Great.
worry. I can do it.
Perfect. So we're going to go ahead and drop that in there because I think that these words are incredibly powerful. And I want to name that this came out, was it January 24th or 28th?
I
It
think it was
was,
the 24th. That sounds about right. Yeah.
yeah, it was within days of the moment at which we really saw a shift in the way that government power spoke about, addressed, targeted, described the trans and non-binary community. And it was so powerful and striking to me and to us at Keshet to see within a matter of days an organization like the FJMC putting out a statement that says the Federation of Jewish Men's Clubs reaffirms its unwavering commitment to standing with the LGBTQIA plus community, and in particular our trans siblings, even in the face of efforts to legally enforce a narrow and binary understanding of gender. We recognize that such policies contradict the Jewish value of seeing every human as created b'tselem Elohim in the image of the divine, and deny the rich diversity of human experience. Our tradition teaches us to pursue justice, tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, to love our neighbors as ourselves, v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, and to protect the vulnerable among us. And it goes on to outline a series of commitments, each one of which grounded in a Jewish value or piece of text, to really put into concrete action what are some things that it means within the context of FJMC to reaffirm a commitment to the dignity, to the value, and to the sort of deservingness to live authentically and safely. And so I really look at what we're doing tonight as sort of a part of, an extension of, a component of this commitment to learning and community building and growth. And I really hope that this is an opportunity for us to really build some tools that you all can use. What I want to do now is let you know a little bit about what's happening. We're going to spend a few minutes on that, and then I'm going to pause what I'm sharing with you and really create some space for us to talk, respond, share, and think. And then we're going to really dig into a little bit of text and some thoughts about what are particular ways that we as individuals, that your clubs, that your communities can start to take. So with that, here we go. I like to use slides for this part because, oh, hey, you all went away when I did it that way. I'm going to do it in the other order. I like to use slides for this part because I tend to be a really visual thinker, and it just works better for me to be able to do that. And why has it not gone to slideshow mode? There we are. All right. So here's a little bit about our current landscape. Um, and the first thing that I want to name, I often get the question exactly at this moment in a program, are we talking about politics? Is this partisan? What's going on here? I really want to name that the day-to-day lives of trans and non-binary people don't need to be inherently political, but in the current reality, which we did not create, sometimes our daily lives have become highly politicized, and there's a difference. Everything we say tonight is not going to be um, partisan, candidate oriented, or politician oriented. But because of the way that our communities have been targeted, it becomes impossible to describe what's happening without naming that there is a politicized landscape that we are functioning in. A way that I like to describe it is my desire. I live in St. Louis, where you kind of have to get in a car to get to the nearest grocery store to me. My desire to get into a car and go to the grocery store and pick up some food for dinner, I don't particularly want that to be a political desire. When my state legislature proposes a bill that calls into question whether I can access a driver's license as a trans person or a driver's license that shows who I am on it, such that if I were to be pulled over, sorry, I have a little bit of a lead foot, I try not to, it happens, um, that the conversation would simply stop at, do you know how fast you were going, and wouldn't become a serious threat to life and safety. When that starts to happen, when the question of can I access a driver's license that's safe to use becomes becomes politicized, my desire to do something as simple as go to the grocery store becomes politicized or political, right? I didn't start it there, but that's kind of where it's going these days. Um, I do want to name that although that bill in several formats was proposed, it does not seem like it has any likelihood of passing, that particular one. And it's a very concrete example of the types of things that are happening both nationally and at the state level. So what I want to name is that right now we're in the midst of what is really constructed as a shock campaign, targeting a wide range of rights and services for the LGBTQ plus and especially the trans and non-binary community. That it's happening both through executive orders and state level legislation. And that we really want to actually separate out those things. That when something happens sort of by an executive order, it actually isn't a law yet. It can't override existing law without process. It can't be enforced without process. And most of these things that are sort of targeting the trans community aren't currently enforceable. What is happening is that these things are being presented with really incredibly derogatory and othering language. So, for example, um, the bans on transgender people serving in the military are being presented using language of and sort of really invoking those sort of anti-trans stereotypes and tropes. Well, it's deceptive, it's not in line with the integrity expected of a service member. So sort of, again, this language that is really meant to denigrate the very personhood of the community while in the process of establishing a ban like that. And what we think the goals of this are to create a sense of overwhelm and inability to act, to get people to do what's called anticipatory compliance. So that's sort of obeying a rule before it's really a rule, or over compliance, right? Going overboard, not because that's the letter of the rule, but because we don't know how far this rule can go. It's scary, so we're just going to do nothing. Um, so, for example, that might apply to something like when we see private companies that aren't impacted by a federal law say, oh, we actually want to roll back our public DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, not because the rule makes us, but because we're scared of the climate. And there seems to be this really, not seems to be, there is this sort of escalating use of transgender and non-binary people as, I mean, essentially it's being a political pawn, right? That we actually see that most of this stuff doesn't have wide support of the individuals and communities who these so-called representatives are in, but they're sort of being used as a wedge issue in order to get some sort of other desired outcome. I want to share, yep, here we go, that some of the things that are at play, and we're not going to do a full detailed legislative overview. That's not what we're here for, but I want to give a little taste so that we can start to dig into the Jewish text and how we can take action. So one of the biggest things happening right now is the conversation around access to gender-affirming healthcare for trans people who are under 19. You'll notice sort of this move of upping that age from 18 to 19 to set a precedent for legal adults also being included, and a ban on Medicaid recipients in many places receiving access to this care. We're seeing things like an attempt to create a government definition of what gender is as only male and female, unchangeable, biological, becomes really complicated for the 1 to 1.5% of people who are intersex, whose biology is actually neither of those options. And that has real implications for people accessing federal ID documents. So things like passports and social security, it is not currently possible for a person to change a gender marker on those, to renew one of those, a passport that had previously had a gender marker changed. And we have heard some reports of people going to renew a passport or apply for a passport, having their other supporting documentation seized and not returned. So that's a place where we are right now. The military service ban we talked about, targeting workplace discrimination rules and diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts in the federal workplace, bathroom bans, federal property, targeting protections for LGBTQ plus people in housing and shelters, looking particularly at the prison system attempts, which have been blocked in court, to move transgender women to men's housing units. Attempts to ban trans athletes from women's and girls' sports. It's notable and interesting that these only target trans girls and not trans boys and non-binary people. And we've seen a real pause in distribution of funding to programs that supply HIV treatment worldwide. We've also seen places where data has been pulled down, particularly of note. There was a lot of activity around the CDC website where, for a period of time, all data referring to transgender and non-binary people was pulled down by court order. Some of it was put back up with a little pop-up box that says, this data is wrong, but the court forced us to put it here. We've seen cases of hospitals over complying and stopping or pausing medical care. And we have seen generally a chilling effect on sort of the public world and landscape for the trans and non-binary community. And that's federally. State level, there's a lot going on. This is from yesterday, so the number might have changed. But according to the ACLU, so far to date, we're in June, there have been 588 anti-LGBTQ plus bills filed on state levels across the United States. On this map, deeper purple means more bills, and lighter purple means no bills. And what I will note is that this is the first year in a long time that I've seen only one state, right? Vermont is the only state that's at zero. Every single other state, there's ongoing conversation at that local level. And some of the things that we're seeing are similar barriers to accurate ID and legal definitions of sex, like we're seeing happen at the federal level. So that's things like the driver's license that I talked about. Seeing things like banning free speech and expressions, especially in schools. And that is that those are things like don't say gay, particularly in states like Florida. Those are things like requirements in states like Florida and Texas that a teacher can't address a student by anything other than their legal name without a signed parental form. So that means also if someone's legal name is Joseph, their teacher cannot call them Joe without a signed permission slip from their parent. And what it means is if that there is a young person who's not yet out to their parents as trans or who wants to use a name that feels a little bit better for themselves, they can't do that safely in school. Healthcare restrictions, about 40% of trans youth in the United States are in a state where they cannot or have severe limitations on their access to gender affirming healthcare. Curriculum censorship, book bans, sports bans. One of the things that's particularly pernicious, we're seeing some states try to mandate that if a student comes out to their teacher in school, the teacher is legally required to notify their parents or caregivers, which is actually places some youth at very high risk. Um, and even those who might wind up physically safe and still having a place to sleep that night, it really does sort of tear away one's autonomy over oneself to have somebody else under legal mandate share that information without permission. And we're continuing to see this pattern of the religious freedom exemptions from non-discrimination legislation. So the idea that if, as a genuine part of your religion, you have to discriminate, then you don't have to follow existing non-discrimination laws. And that's a place where I think the Jewish community has a really important role to play in some of the work that we can do. And where well, I'm not sure why it did that, but I'm going to take down my share. Oh, I know exactly why it did that. I'm going to take down my share a moment. And that was actually where I wanted us to be in conversation a little bit. And I wanted to hear a little bit from you. How are you responding? What is jumping out at you right now?
Please feel free to raise your hand
Mhm.
and share your name and where you're coming at us from. That would just be helpful in establishing the community.
Yes, please.
Barry?
So, my name is Barry Lichtenstein. I'm in Framingham, Mass, outside of Boston.
Hmm.
And the thing that jumps out at me is that there's 2, 4, 6, 8, 11 people on this, and I thought there would be 100.
Hmm.
And that's the thing that jumps out at me. I'm in Massachusetts. We're pretty safe here. I have uh, a trans non-binary adult child, and it's even here, it's a daily challenge.
Yeah.
Um, and like things like you said, IDs, um, they get testosterone, and we're not sure how long that's going to be available.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, it's just like um, they've had various surgeries because the concept of them perhaps ever becoming pregnant was so mind-boggling that they made sure that could never happen.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's just scary on a daily basis, and people don't get it. And they're just a kid. I mean, well, they're just a kid. They're 37, but they're my kid.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just a person trying to live their life, but it's not. They're just so many things being thrown in front of them.
Yeah. I mean, what really jumps out at me is both the sense of, and sort of I as a trans person and a trans adult living here, yes, it can feel very overwhelming. And sort of how does one even keep track of this onslaught? And then something else that jumps out at me, Barry, in what you shared is this notion of people wanting to have control and ownership over their own bodies, right? And sort of a sense of what does it mean for control over one's own body to suddenly be like a point of debate in a government? And
Yeah.
that's a very scary thought. Yeah. I saw Jerry and then Logan also.
I want to agree with the previous speaker about numbers. Our synagogue is always filled to capacity, but on Pride Shabbat, there are less people. But I don't know about you folks, but I feel like I'm in a time warp back to the 50s. This whole thing boggles my mind. And my lesbian daughter was always at the forefront of these situations, said that trans is the new gay. As gay rights and gay marriage have gained greater acceptance, trans individuals are being targeted. So thank you.
Yeah, Jerry, it really does sort of resonate in the sense of it does feel like time is doing something very strange. And this notion of sort of having achieved a lot of progress in that civil rights realm and now have to fight for some of it back.
Hmm.
That
Yeah.
feels a very particular way.
Make America hate again.
I didn't hear you.
He was echoing the sentiment that you're hearing about make America hate again,
Oh,
unfortunately.
yeah. Yep, there is that. There is that. Logan, I saw you also.
Yeah, so I'm trans and
Oh,
uh, I'm lucky enough to get health insurance through my job, but my sibling who's non-binary, they're on like they're on Medicaid for disability, and like every day I'm wondering if they're gonna lose their coverage for their hormones and for their surgeries and stuff, and it's me and my whole group of friends are just so stressed out. So.
Mhm.
And I was really happy to see that the Federation was putting this together because it's nice to know that like a group that's like getting more and more important in my life is on my side with that kind of thing.
Hmm. Amazing. And
We're here
Logan.
for you, Logan. We're here for you, brother.
Yeah. And thank you for naming that there is this sort of sense of constant uncertainty that for a lot of us feels like it's very much the norm and the sort of what could be pulled out from under one. Um, and that there are some pretty high stakes to an abrupt loss in access to the medication that keeps one okay and whole, or whatever adjective each individual might use to describe what it means. But very typically for those trans people, I will say that not every trans person uses medical care as part of their transition, but for those who do, it is medically necessary, it is life sustaining, and it is often life saving. And that's a piece of the conversation that isn't always lifted up when people sort of bandy about what would it mean to lose access. And I really want that to be known.
Rabbi Micah, would it be okay if I ask the group, just I'm curious to know if any other participants here also have family members who are trans or non-binary and have equally, experienced and empathized with this. I mean, at the very least, anxiety, but threat to themselves. Bob.
Yeah, I have a non-binary child, adult child, who the day after, like within a week after they turned majority of 18, went without my knowledge illegally to the court and changed their name um, to a non-gender specific name from a very gender specific name that they had before, and then sent me a copy of the court order when it went through. And that's kind of how I found out about the name change, that we were supposed to then, from that moment on, start to use. And we adapted to it. They're not particularly organized, so I actually have the legal order with the court seal in my desk drawer at home, so that whenever they need it, like, Dad, I need a copy of that order. We've dealt with these issues. It's been a challenge for the family. I mean, we come from a fairly progressive family, but been a challenge for the family to get the pronouns right, even, and they get disturbed about that, but recognize that it's harder for older people to change. So we have continuing discussions, but I have to say that when we put out the statement on the webmaster also, so I published the statement on the front page of the website with the pride and trans flags attached to it that Rabbi Raucher gave me. And it was one of the proudest moments that I could then just send that link to my child and say, okay, here it is. And I think just that has helped open up our dialogue even more. And, and there are these concerns, of course, right? With the gender issues. They want to travel, a passport and documentation. And they were, and we're not alone. I went to Uganda to visit the Abba Yedaya in December or January, and they were afraid to go to Uganda with me because of Uganda's policy. Now, I said, well, no one's going to target you if you're part of a Jewish group, but they were still, so it goes beyond the U.S., of course. But now, I work for the federal government, or I worked until March for the federal government, for the State Department, and I ran an internal wiki called Diplopedia. Okay. And I had orders right after January 20th, and that we had 35,000 articles about diplomacy on that wiki. And I was ordered to go in and scrub anything that referred to DEI or anything the State Department had done to protect rights of the LGBTQ plus community overseas. So we're just like in kind of a 1984 sense, wiping out any federal acknowledgement that we had ever endorsed these rights. So it is a scary time.
It is. And I want to name a couple of other things because I can sort of feel us all very much sinking into the fact that it's a scary time. And that is real. And it is not a time at which we are without options, steps, power. And I want to talk to us a little bit about what some of those things are. So I want to give a couple of examples because I don't want us to leave this just feeling like, okay, now I know and I care, but now what? So I want to share that earlier this week, we received the news that the Florida legislative session had ended. And during that session, I know it's amazing to think that state level lawmakers can work 60 days out of the year, and that's its own thing. But that every single one of their anti-LGBTQ plus bills at the state level was blocked. I want to name that of these things that have come out at the federal level through the courts, through contacting legislators, through really putting that increased pressure on the people who are responsible to us, we have seen a tremendous number of these things be at least temporarily, if not over the longer term, paused and stopped. So for example, when we talk about healthcare for trans youth, there are state level bans active in effect right now. 40% of trans youth under 18 are in a place where they have severe limitations on their access to care. And We're awaiting a Supreme Court ruling in the next couple of days to a week that may shift that and impact that. And the courts established a ban, a stay on implementation of the federal level ban. Right. So it's tools like those that are particularly helpful to us in this moment. The goal of the strategy is overwhelm, is inaction, and is in because I know that the communities that I'm part of are not the only targeted communities right now. The sense of there's too much going on to do anything about any of it, so I'll do nothing. And when we can actually continue to show up for ourselves and for one another, and to deepen and strengthen those mutual and two-way relationships, I think there is actually tremendous room to stop the progress of some of this anti-LGBTQ plus and anti-trans stuff, to sort of claw back and pull back some of the rights and safety that we have worked so hard over so many years to achieve. And not only that, but to articulate and move towards a positive vision of what it is that we want to build as an equitable and fair society. And there are things being proposed. The Equality Act, for example, has been reintroduced because it's not only about stopping the anti, but about actively working for the pro. There's also tremendous work to be done within our communities, our sort of civic communities and our Jewish communities. And yes, I'm seeing a note that mainstream conservative organizations and synagogues are increasingly highlighting the presence of the LGBTQ plus community. One of the ways that that can happen is through a Pride Shabbat. Absolutely. And the Rabbinical Assembly has put out many statements, as has the FJMC, and this sort of, it's very much become the mainstream voice of the conservative movement to just actively support LGBTQ plus rights and to speak out on issues impacting the civil rights of any subset of our community's constituents. So here's what I want to share with you. One of the things that I think is particularly powerful is when we can speak from a place of Jewish values. When we talk both in individual conversations as well as in those sort of what might be larger advocacy spaces, when we can speak from a place of Jewish values. I'm sorry that it took us back to the beginning, but here we go. I want to talk to us about some of those Jewish value texts that we can use when we're having those conversations, because I want to give you some of those tools. And there's actually, especially if I can pull it back up without taking down my screen. Here we go. There is 7. Here we go. 7 Jewish values for inclusive communities and 7 steps to a community of equality and belonging are some of the resources that we at Keshet have for you. And in particular, I want to talk to us about values like people are created b'tselem Elohim, in the divine image, which was already in your statement. This notion of an obligation Jewishly to pursue justice. Gotta go back one. This notion of lo ta'amod al dam re'echa, which literally it means don't stand upon the blood of your fellow. And it's been interpreted a whole bunch of different ways. Don't stand idly by somebody else's being targeted or being harmed, or don't allow yourself to profit by somebody else's being harmed. And I actually want to name that what's particularly powerful is in that verse of the Torah, Lo ta'amod al dam re'echa, don't stand idly by the blood of your neighbor. Lo telech rachil ba'amecha is the second half of the verse. Don't go around as a talebearer, a gossip, a slanderer in your community. So why are those two mitzvot put in the same verse? A lot of our commentators teach because the way that we speak about people leads directly to, when it is positive, well-being, support, community, opportunity, But when it is negative, there's a direct connection between the derogatory language against a person or a group and dam, right? Harm, blood, suffering of that. And to me, that is certainly a lesson that I think our Jewish communities have ample reason to know, that when we tolerate a public conversation that denigrates or others an entire group, that's also part of this mitzvah of lo ta'amod al dam re'echa, right? To not tolerate that language either. Showing up from a place of mutual responsibility, showing up from a place of civic engagement, right? That there is ample Jewish tradition that says we invest our time and our energy in building the society that we want to live in right here, wherever it is that we are. There's Jewish value of persistence. There's the text of, it's not on you to complete all the work right now today, but that doesn't mean that if it's too big, you give up on it. And finally, I've got a name chutzpah, and I will tell you, I went like 10 rounds with leadership on chutzpah as a Jewish value. But I think that it is something that both culturally and like textually, Jewishly and religiously, it's a strong point that we've got, right? That we've got Abraham who goes to God and says in this story way back in Genesis of God saying, I'm going to destroy these cities. Abraham says, but if you're the judge of all the world, shouldn't you do justice? How dare you do anything less than justice? And that is so fundamentally baked in, I think, to the story of what it means to be Jewish, that we can go to even a tremendous source of power and say, how dare you not do justice? So I want to invite us to start to use, and I'm going to put in the chat a whole bunch of resources that's going to include a little more full text on each of those. But I want to encourage you to start using those Jewish values when you talk about this stuff in your communities. I want you to encourage you to remember from our history that we have a tremendous amount of power to speak up, that it is dangerous when a community is scapegoated or othered or used as a sort of target for hatred, and that it's real important that we have access to things like documents and travel and safety. I don't want to forget that piece either. And I want to talk to you about a couple ways that we can take action, because Jewish organizations have actually a really unique role right now. So much of what's happening, especially federally, has very specific carve-outs for private religious organizations, which every one of our clubs, every one of our synagogues, every Jewish day school, Jewish Federation, a JCC, is a private religious organization. And that means that many of these potential laws or policies aren't going to apply to them. And that actually means that the Jewish organizations that we're in, especially in certain states, might be becoming one of very few places where our community, the trans and non-binary community, can continue to exist in an affirming way. And that means it is more important than ever that our Jewish communities state our values clearly, not over comply or sort of get caught up in this, we're not sure what the rule is, so we're going to pull back. And also it's really important that we be a faith voice for equality. So much of this legislation is framed in the sense of, well, the religious voice is anti-LGBTQ, and so religious freedom means the ability to discriminate. And we have the ability to say, actually, our religious tradition teaches that each person is in the image of the divine and deserving of dignity, and religious freedom means not discriminating. And bringing that faith voice, calling your local lawmaker and saying, as a Jew, if you have a title, as a rabbi, if your cantor can be, brought in to call and say, as a member of the clergy, right? I believe X, Y, and Z. Naming and bringing those values to the conversation can really help shift the narrative in a way that is uniquely powerful. We can make sure our communities are places of safe haven. Those are things like making sure that our policies are equitable, that we have non-discrimination and anti-harassment and anti-bullying language in place, that we're sharing our voice and our values, that we're acknowledging what's happening, right? That doesn't mean that I want to hear every single day to any place that I go, this is a terrible time to be trans, how are you? But it also feels real weird to show up somewhere and have it feel like it's not on anybody else's radar, even in the slightest. And really think about what are the emerging needs right now in your communities. And I also want to say the biggest thing I want you all to do after this conversation is talk about this stuff with people in your lives. And I want to say, especially if you have a public platform in your one-to-one conversations and also in the programs that you bring to your community or ask for your leaders to bring to your community, talk about this stuff. Use those values we talked about. Some of you in this space, you talked about, here's what it means for me. Here's what it means to me. And I would urge you, if you're talking about people in your family, make sure you've got whatever level of consent around their privacy is important. But with that consent, being able to say, it's really hard for me to have my child scared for their medical care. That doesn't seem fair. Or, when I was at such and such program, here's what really mattered to me. And I think about what might it be like to be trans and want to have that same experience, right? Make it real. An instruction that I want to give, especially to folks on the call who might not yourselves be trans or non-binary, you have the ability, not that I as a trans person don't, it is often easier to meet somebody who's in kind of a little bit more of an anti-space where they are with the amount of empathy it takes to be ready to learn. If you can give yourself a little bit of space from they're talking about me when they say that. That doesn't mean we validate the thing they say, right? It might be being able to say, I hear that this feels really new to you. It also didn't feel so comfortable for me at first, and here's how I learned. And that can be a really powerful way for somebody to see the possibility of, I could change my mind about something without losing something that feels core to me. And that's something that it can be particularly powerful when allies, right, when people who care about the trans and non-binary community, but aren't themselves trans or non-binary, really lean into that space. And it can maybe take some of that emotional burden also off of those of us who do live in those identities. So I want to ask you to please talk about this stuff as much as you can. Stay informed. If you sign up for Keshet emails, you'll get plenty of updates. And there are also plenty of reputable news sources. And I'm going to send this deck with these links to you, Rabbi Noam. And your local groups can help you get connected up with what is important advocacy that's happening. And finally, a couple of ways to take action. If you're part of an organization, a really simple thing to do, you can have your organization join Thrive. This is a partnership between Keshet and Sojourn, which is an LGBTQ Jewish organization that focuses on the South in the US. And we have a program called Thrive, the Jewish Coalition to Defend Trans and LGBTQ plus Youth. Monthly meetings to learn about what's happening, tools for taking action. There's a whole Trans Pride Shabbat toolkit going out this week because we're really encouraging synagogues to have a Trans Pride Shabbat. You can look at Keshet's calendar. You can attend an advocacy event. And whether you do it as part of an event or not, you can call or write to your legislators, both at the state level and nationally. We have resources, trainings. You can click a link and it will say, here's what's going on in your state. Here's who your lawmakers are. Here's a template for how to call them or send them a text. We make it as easy as possible. And it really matters. Even for the person who you think is never going to change their mind, they always, always, always have to count how many calls do we get? How many emails do I get? And, in some states like Missouri, it has made the difference between somebody voting for an anti-trans measure and somebody conveniently not being there that day because they know that it's not popular with their constituents. So even if they're not ready to go on record voting down bigotry, they might abstain, vote present, or not show up so that a bill doesn't pass. And that's been a really important tool in our toolbox. Similarly, the people who are already pro, they need to hear thank you for supporting trans rights. And they need that constant reinforcement that this is the politically winning strategy for you. This is what your constituents want. Because without that voice, and I think we started our conversation here, sometimes the negative is louder. And so we really want to make sure for the people who are voting in support of trans and LGBTQ plus rights that they are consistently getting the message of, yes, this is what your constituents continue to want. And if you want to host an advocacy event, we will send you a stack a mile high of postcards and instructions on who to send them to and how. And you can have a postcard party, and you can send as many postcards as you want to your local lawmakers. They're in my closet right there. I'm like pointing at them as if you can see them. You can't. But they have some stats on the front really showing that an overwhelming majority of American voters of all parties support non-discrimination and basic civil rights. There's a space to write in. What does it mean? What are we asking you to vote on at this moment? All 501c3 compliance, nonpartisan because it's about issues and because it is under the percentage of time that one can spend on politics and still be nonprofit. Don't worry, we have thought about this a lot. But you can host a postcard party and you can take action for LGBTQ plus rights in that way. And we've made some real progress, right? We've had folks do things like reach thousands of voters in phone banks, sent letters to Congress about the Respect for Marriage Act, commenting in the previous administration on Title IX, that is the clause that talks about sex discrimination and the interpretation of it that says this is supported by the Supreme Court, any discrimination on the basis of being trans or being LGBTQ plus inherently violates Title IX because it always involves the gender of the person. We've had advocacy days and sign-on days, and we would be so happy to work with any of your clubs, your synagogues, your organizations to help keep this work moving. And the last things that I want to say before we open to more conversation, solidarity matters. I think I said this before. A lot of communities are impacted right now. Our whole Jewish community is hurting right now, right? Immigrant communities are hurting right now. And really naming that we don't have to go it alone. We don't have to do every single thing, but the more that we can be in relationship with other communities, I think the stronger we'll be. Really want to encourage you to learn and be willing to try new things, to nurture and draw strength from your relationships, to remember that the work is long-term. It's not gonna we want you to be sustainable, right? It's not gonna all happen overnight. And that finally, and this is like the Dvar Torah that I give all month long in June, it is really important to find opportunities for joy and celebration along the way, because this is not just about stopping the bad. This is about, there is a world that we can build that is a world of dignity, equity, celebration, right? For those of us on the call who are trans, for the family members that you spoke about, for yourselves, for every single one of us. And so it's important to not let those reserves of joy get drained away as we are in this work. With that, I'm going to take down my slides yet again. Oh, my favorite quote. I quoted it before, right? Oh, no, I didn't. But everyone is responsible for one another, and every one of us is impacted by what happens to one another. Now I'm going to take down my slides because I want to use our last couple minutes for discussion, for questions, for things that you've seen work, or for things that you're excited to try.
I want to say, first of all, let me just say thank you, Rabbi Micah. That was really wonderful and inspiring. Thank you so much for your time and your wisdom. This is so incredibly helpful, and we very much appreciate your expertise. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Toda rabah.
Thank you.
I have a question. Let's say we have, a trans or non-binary child, or just, someone close in our life. And we want to show them that we're there for them. Is there just like, I don't want to boil it down or reduce it or anything, but is there just like a simple thing we could do or say that would really just be very easy for them to understand that we're there for them?
Mm, I love that question. I think so much of it flows from like, what's the authentic relationship right now? What do you know in relationship with that person? But I can speak for myself and I can say, as someone who is living through a really, really wild time in the world right now, it's lovely when friends check in and say, hey, things are rough right now. How are you doing? And even if I don't want to talk about it at that moment, the fact that someone even knew enough to say things are rough right now and they cared enough to ask how I'm doing, that matters to me.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very helpful.
Thank you. And I think especially like when a big thing happens that hits the news can be one of those moments that it can also be helpful to check in and say, hey, that was a lot. How you doing? And to know that if someone just says thanks for checking in and doesn't want to talk, that doesn't mean they don't appreciate that you asked. I saw another hand. Jerry. Oh, you are still muted. Can't hear you.
Thank you. This is a most impressive Torah learning session. My question is, how do you deal with people who are uncomfortable with change? They're not anti, but, that the conservative movement has gone through many changes in terms of ordination of women and so on and so on. How do you help people to change?
Mm, I feel
All-
like that's always the biggest question, right?
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think by and large, a lot of us have a gut reaction to change that it's uncomfortable and it's scary. And I think it's really important to have the capacity to meet that gut reaction with some empathy while continuing to move people towards that vision. Sometimes it can be about finding a shared value and then talking about how that shared value applies to the thing you're working for. So, for example, gosh, I don't want to open some of the like hardest stuff, but for example, a lot of the language that's targeting the trans community now frames itself as for women's safety, focusing
Right.
only on a certain subset of cis women and being able to name, I really care about safety. I really care about women's safety and everyone's safety. Let's think about how actually a world of safety for people of all genders is core to that, right? We don't make some women safer by making other women less safe. We all get safe together. Let's talk about how to do that, right? But like starting from a place of, oh, I hear your value. I share that value. Here's how that value connects to the thing. And that other piece that I shared earlier, there seems to be a lot of science out there that shows that when people can hear somebody else telling a story of changing their own mind, it can feel less scary for that person to maybe also change their mind, right? Especially right now, like it feels really hard not to be dug into a position as feeling like, well, if I don't believe that anymore, who am I? That's a real feeling. But the more we can hear somebody else say, yeah, I really had a hard time with that and I got there and it was okay, that can help also like loosen up some of that tension around change.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I'll also say one more thing. Sometimes it can be about, and I know we're at time, but sometimes it can be about not necessarily getting someone to agree with you, but getting people to still act and comport themselves in ways that don't cause harm. And I think that's often most particularly true when we're talking about like communal settings or there's a new policy or we're doing
Yeah.
things a different way. We can hear someone out. We can say, I appreciate your position. Here's why we're doing what we're doing. And I'm really glad we were able to talk this out. And like the expectation will be that they comport themselves in ways that are polite and respectful regardless.
Rabbi Micah, I can't thank you enough. I am so glad we were able to put this program together and that men in our community were able to benefit from it. It's been a really wonderful time. You have been a true bracha, a blessing, a source of abundance for us, a real wellspring of knowledge and love and compassion that I think we all needed to hear and be exposed to. Because I do agree with the sentiment from, I think two people said it. It would be nice to have more people here, more people to show up at Pride Shabbat. And I think we're still working towards that as a community. But I think it was also Margaret Mead who said all you need is a small group, right, of concerned citizens to change the world because it's been the only thing that ever has really done it. This can be that small group, right? We
Awesome.
can go out, we can reverberate this message throughout our communities. And the next time we do something like this, it can have double or triple, right, the attendance. So we can really make this a community where everyone does show up, right, on the Pride Shabbat for the Pride events and all the times outside of that as well when it really matters, not just when it's Pride Month. Gentlemen, thank you all very much for staying with us this whole time. I really appreciate your commitment to this event, your intimacy and sharing, and your vulnerability to also share what's going on in your lives and the lives of your loved ones. Rabbi Micah, we'd love to have you back at some other time. Would like to arrange it with you. Thank you again so much for giving us so generously tonight. Really. Toda rabah.